Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds. This week, it's a real pleasure to have Sohag Saleh with us. Sohag is a principal teaching fellow at Imperial College London. And he's got a really fascinating story which he's going to share with us this afternoon. So Sohag, what can I say? I'm going to start with my usual kind of question, which is, thanks for coming, but also, what was it that gave you your initial sense of belonging growing up, your sense of identity, who you were as a youngster?
So it's interesting. So now that I'm older, I get very philosophical about this, but belonging has, I didn't know at the time, but belonging has always been such an important part of my life, as I think it is for everyone's life. When I was young, I lived in a small town up near Leeds called Keighley, which I doubt many people will have heard of. And there, there weren't very many it wasn't ethnically diverse, basically, is what I'm saying. And so the schools I actually went to, I went to a Catholic school as a primary school and then a Catholic school as a secondary school as well. Mm-hmm. And I was me and my two older sisters were the only Muslims in these Catholic schools. And so belonging began for me at that stage, really. I mean, and initially you belong in your family, you don't have any choice with that, but then when you have a choice in who you want to belong with, you want to belong with friends or people you meet at school. And so already being a kind of outsider in terms of, firstly, the color of my skin, my name, thirdly, my religion, it was very difficult for me to belong to that community because I just was different to everyone else, which was kind of normal with kids. And you know what children are like, it's like, if anyone's different, it's always a bad thing. And so to belong to the community, I essentially I had to become a Catholic to go to school. So I had to be baptized. I had my first Holy Communion. I was confirmed a Catholic, which is very strange for someone who is also a Muslim. Technically, my parents are both practicing Muslims. So my first sense of belonging at school was that I needed to be similar to all of the other children that I was growing up with, and they were all Caucasian Catholic people.
So I'm just thinking about that in terms of the fact that you're a Muslim boy. So at home you would practice. Am I right in saying that at home you would practice the Muslim traditions, and then at school you were practicing the Catholicism, etc., or learning about Catholicism? How did that work out, kind of thing?
They're actually very similar in terms of monotheist religions. So Islam is essentially just Christianity. So Catholicism is obviously just a branch of Christianity. It's just a little bit further along the New Testament that Christianity is. So they're not really that different at all. They're just some of the processes are slightly different in terms of the way that people pray and who they technically pray to is different. So my family weren't hugely religious. I mean, my family are religious, but it was never forced upon me in the way that it can be with some individuals. Mm-hmm. So although I retained a lot of the Muslim traditions, like the big festivals, like you might have heard of Eid, for example. Although that was the main time that I was I did all the things, but in general, we just had a kind of normal lifestyle, and I would learn about both religions.
Yeah. Okay. So in school, were there any? You said that it was just yourself and your sisters in terms of Asians in the school. Were there any Black children or any other? How diverse would you say the school was, and how did that impact you in who you were seeing in front of you as such?
There were about throughout the whole of middle school, there were less than 10 probably in terms of we're talking about Black people and Black students and Asian. There were even fewer kind of Asian students as well there. What was the next part of the question?
No, so how did that make you feel? How did you fit in then? What was the dynamics like being such a minority within the school? Were there any other Asian boys, or who did you hang out with, or was it not an issue?
Well, if I kind of look back at it and reflect on it now, it was difficult because there would be constant kind of comments. If you ever did anything wrong, there'd be a comment like, "Oh, it's because you've got brown skin" or something like that. At the time, because that was normal. To me, it wasn't an issue. To me, it was banter. So like, I suppose banter now might be, oh, you've got a stupid beard, for example. But banter back then was, you're packy. And so, you just took it in your stride at that time. So growing up, there were things, you'd have people asking like, is it because you don't wash? That's the reason why your skin's that color. And you'd be like, well, no. But you just have to deal with it. I mean, there was no point in getting upset about it, because if I did get upset about it, then I'd spend my whole childhood being upset about it. And so I just got on with associating with the people who I was friends with. Little things that I'll be honest, the things that kind of helped me growing up was that my two sisters are older, and both of my two older sisters are very attractive, and so all of the boys in the older years fancied my older sisters, and so they were always quite nice to me. So that worked in my advantage, which was fantastic. I was reasonably good at sport as well, and so as a child, as around that age, it's important to be good at sport, because that's another group that you can belong to, because belonging in a sports group is a nice kind of community. So if I was treated the way then, and if I kind of go back now and I was treated like that now, it would be a big problem for me. But at the time, that way it wasn't really.
I understand that. So you had mechanisms to kind of like cope with it. Did you ever kind of like speak to your parents about it, or was it just something which you handled by yourself, kind of thing?
Well, we also lived in a community where there weren't many Asian or brown people, so my parents were also accustomed to it. So kind of being judged and facing all of those comments, and there were certain expectations of people. It was kind of like, oh, why do you not run the local corner shop, or surely your dad should be a taxi driver, and things like that. Things such as that. So those are the kind of expectations. So it was, because it was the norm, we just accepted it and carried on with our lives.
So what gave you kind of like the passion for so going through kind of like secondary school and then going on to the degree, because you said you were just from Keighley, another chap from Keighley other than yourself. Well, no, we were at university together. And when you came to university, where did you stay up in the Leeds area, or did you branch out? What was your kind of like thinking about your teenage years and where you wanted to be in your kind of like self-identity at that stage?
So I think there was an interesting kind of transition period. So when I actually did my A levels in Leicester. So my dad lived in Leicester, and we kind of moved to Leicester for a few years, and so I did my A levels in Leicester. And Leicester was a slightly more diverse. There was more diversity in Leicester than there was in Leeds, basically. But it was a different kind of diversity, I suppose. So during the time when I was in Leicester for 2 years, I found it to be quite segregated. But I mean, I say that as a bad thing, but it's because people felt comfortable in those groups. So there was a strong kind of Indian community in Leicester, and the Indian community presence was there. Because there was such a large kind of Indian community, a lot of the Indian students stuck together. But because a lot of the Indian students were from Goa, in the Catholic school that I was in Leicester, so Goa is a place where you have a lot of Catholic, because obviously there's a lot of religions in India, but
Yeah.
there were a lot of Catholics from Goa, so there were far more Indian students in the Catholic school that I went to in Leicester.
Yeah.
And so this was really my first time encountering Indian students. But myself being Bangladeshi, I was always identified as being Indian.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that
Yeah.
kind of category. So Leicester was interesting. I found it more segregated. I did associate with Indian students, but I still, because I suppose my comfort zone, I'd always felt like I belonged amongst the white community. I was always described at that stage as a coconut, which is brown on the outside but white on the inside. But that was what belonging was for me. That was a community that I was brought up in, and so I was more accustomed to associating with.
Your frame of reference, because of where you had grown up and the people who you had associated with, it was more with individuals from the white community as opposed to other Asian communities. That's what, So after doing your A levels, did you stay in Leicester, go back to Leeds, come to London? What was the kind of like choices available to you at that time? What were you thinking?
So I mean, I had a lot of choices. My parents were very keen for us to get educated, and so university was definitely something that I really wanted to do. And so I was in the chat, Oreos was it's one of those similar terms that people use. I was determined to come to London, basically. I still don't know why I wanted to come to London, but I just wanted to come to London, and I actually took a year out after my A levels, and I worked during that year in like a bar type as a cocktail bartender, which again was a really useful experience for me. But then I came down to London, and in London, all of a sudden the community was very different. So I was doing a degree in pharmacology, and all of a sudden half the people on my pharmacology course were Asian. And so this was a very different scenario to what I was accustomed to, and naturally I'd be like, oh well, I'm not accustomed to associating with Asian people. I will hang out with the white people, but I'm accustomed to. But it didn't work out like that for me at university. I was part of, which I thought, well, for me it was usually I used to call it, I was part of the Asian crew, and I used to use that I suppose I used to use it in a derogatory sense, because I just wasn't accustomed to it, even though I am Asian. But I was those were my friends. And those are friends that I've kept since as well. So moving to London was very different. It was the first time I really belonged in a community that was similar to me ethnically, and I found that I did get on with people as well.
So let me just unpack that a little bit then, because when you said about you became part of the Asian crew, were there any things within, now that your frame of references were changing from the predominantly white environment which you had been in, now going into a predominantly Asian environment, what was there an attraction? What was it about this new community of friends, do you think, that kept you in there, as it were?
So that's that's a really interesting question. You're absolutely right. I mean, what was because what I think about when I was younger, it was very important for me to belong in part of the group, because when you're an outsider, all you need to do is belong with somebody. And again, as you're young, you need those things. As I've grown up, or as I've been growing up, I think by the time I got to university, as well as having taken a kind of year out, it wasn't so important to me to be like other people. I didn't need to dress like other people. I didn't need to act like other people. I had a sense of self-security where I was kind of like, I don't need to belong to a community. I am my own person, and if people like me for that, then I will get on with them. I suppose it was a kind of phase of growing up, as you do when you get to that stage. And I suppose at university I went the complete opposite way. So initially when I was at school, I was very much like, I need to belong, I need to be like everyone else. When I was at university, I was like, I need to be very different to everyone else. And so I'd completely shifted my kind of mentality, and the way that I decided that I need to be very different to everyone else was just the way I kind of present myself. And I dressed very differently to the cultural norms at the time.
Yeah.
I presented my hair very differently. I don't know, I wasn't quite punk rock type person, but it was like that, I'd have bleached blonde hair and
okay,
things, etc. And I'd wear
okay.
some small clothes.
I'm just having a vivid picture of you with bleached blonde hair.
it never went fully blonde because obviously my hair's dark, although it's obviously a lot more whiter now. But my it just went ginger, so I'd be a bleached ginger hair.
So you've gone from that position of kind of like, oh, I'm feeling I needed to belong. Now I'm secure within myself that I don't care what people think, but I don't necessarily need that sense of I belong here, because you felt that it didn't matter where you were, that you felt that you could belong. Is that kind of what happened?
That's yeah, I mean, it's really strange because you do need to belong. Everybody needs to belong at certain levels. You have your, like I said, you mentioned, you have your family that you initially belong with, and then you have your own people who you choose to belong with. So those are friends. But again, the school that you're in, you don't get that much of a choice for that. So it's a bit kind of forcing. University was very much more my choice. This was something that I wanted to be, and these are the people that I chose to belong with. And I suppose again by that time I was because I'd spent so much of my time focusing on being a person that other people would want to have around them, that then it was kind of maybe just shifting the other way and thinking, do you know what, I do like belonging, but I'm also more secure in myself now. I feel like I know who I am, or I was getting to know more of the person that I am. I say that I was in my 20s at that stage, and then there were kind of other levels. I think what else changed to me at university, I suppose I suppose, it sounds really weird, the ultimate level of belonging is finding a partner. I suppose, in a way, because then you kind of really belong. And so this was an interesting stage of my life because I actually got married when I was really young.
Right.
So I was married when I was at university.
Right. Okay.
So that influenced as well my requirement for belonging. And so that was that's kind of different. I'm no longer married, and because I got married way too young. But that kind of shifted things as well in my mind in terms of who I needed to belong to.
So if you don't mind me exploring that a little bit in terms of getting married so young, was it out of choice that you got married that young, or what was the thinking behind it, in terms of, was it that craving to belong that you chose to get married to belong to that person? I don't know if that's a...
No, it's this I often I think back on it, and it's possibly one of the reasons why I look back and I think about things kind of culturally and religious in religious sense. So the girl that I was married to was a Bangladeshi Muslim girl, and the only way for us to belong in our society as a couple was for us to be a married couple. And to me at the time that was considered normal within our society. Is like you can't have a girlfriend who spends the night with you, for example. You have to marry her. I mean, it's like that was system. So it wasn't a case of, I really want to get married, this is thing. It was kind of not to be, I mean, at the time I was like, I'm comfortable getting married because I do really, I was in love at that stage. But if there hadn't been that requirement, that pressure to belong in our society, then no, I wouldn't have got married at such a young age. It was it wasn't grown up enough. And again, that's hugely influenced my my belief in kind of belonging, because after our marriage kind of broke down, or during the period that our marriage broke down, all of a sudden I was very isolated. Because I no longer had it was strange. So being that you no longer had the requirement to belong to people, and then all of a sudden, when that one big thing that you belong to all of a sudden disappears, all of a sudden you become very, very isolated. And there was a period of my life where it was it was strange being very, very isolated. But at that stage as well, I kind of became comfortable with being alone, being by myself, and maybe I might even describe I became a bit of a loner. I'd probably describe myself now possibly as I'm more comfortable being a bit of a loner sometimes. Whether I got to the stage of being a misanthrope, I'm probably not that far, but I was fine within my own company, and so that's kind of shaped again my own personal needs for belonging.
I understand that. So it's that response to having that intense sense of belonging, that relationship which then breaks down, and then what fills that void, as it were. And it's either people can go off into other relationships, or you can kind of like look at yourself and say, well, what is it that I need? What is it that I as an individual need? I think is kind of like where you got to. So how would you say, from that point, how did you kind of like get beyond that kind of like sense of loss, as it were?
Well, as it transpired, the timing wise, this was pretty much when I started working at Imperial. So just after I'd kind of the marriage had kind of broken down, and at that stage I was then I was a single dad with a 2-year-old girl at that stage, and I just started working at Imperial then as well. So I had a new job. I was essentially a new person, really. Nobody knew anything about me when I came to Imperial. I didn't know anybody from Imperial. Starting working at Imperial College was a complete shift. Nobody knew anything about me. Nobody knew my history. Nobody knew my background. Nobody needed to know anything about me. So that whole part of my life has disappeared, and I'd now started a new life at Imperial, and there was no requirement. People would just it was like having a clean slate, I suppose. And kind of starting to belong in a new community, because you're always I suppose you're always slightly judged on your past experience. People, I mean, it's nothing bad, it's just natural that people will do that. So starting at Imperial for me just was a big turning point for me, both personally and professionally.
So all right, you've started in this new environment at Imperial, right? And we both know what Imperial's like, so I'm going to just ask you it straight, right? When you first took the job and you looked around, what was your first impression of Imperial College?
I didn't really, because I mean, the thing is, like I said, I had so many other things going on in my life. So to me, my job was a kind of escaping any of the inadequacies in my job, which was so trivial that they didn't matter to me because were far more difficult. But when I came to Imperial, I think again, when I kind of reflect back on it, and I'll always think, I do always think this. I was thinking, when I first started Imperial, this was a situation that was a new job, getting divorced, had a young daughter that I need to look after by myself. I was like, if I manage to survive that, it doesn't get that much more difficult for me personally anyway. But what I thought about Imperial, so I didn't realize it at the time. Again, I'm so accustomed to being in an environment where people are different to me, and that to me wasn't an issue. As it transpires, I was one of about a handful of teaching fellows. There was a new job family had essentially started, but nobody knew that this job family existed. I was a teaching fellow. There were 2 other teaching fellows at Imperial College within the Faculty of Medicine when I started, and one started at the same time as me. And so there was no teaching fellow community. People didn't really know what a teaching fellow was. It took me a while to become kind of established doing my thing. The other aspect of it was, this was my late 20s, early kind of 30s. So I started Imperial at 29. And I also looked younger than I was. So I would have looked around 23, 24 at that stage. So that's one of the things I'm fortunate about my genes. But in terms of my age, I think that also had a weird effect on my kind of belonging at Imperial, because I worked with all the academic teams, not really the scientific labs. I worked in the academic teams, and the academic teams were all established people. So established academics. So most people were around the ages of 40 above, around. So 40 was kind of like the younger academic at that time. And then you also had, I mean, you had a few clinicians as well, but generally the people giving lectures were the more established clinicians. So most of the people I worked with were not significantly older than me. But then there was the students who were around, 20, 21, 22. And in terms of my age, I was actually closer to the students than I was to my work colleagues. And when I kind of look back, that was the community that I initially fitted in with. Was the student community. I would say it was to do with my age, but it was also to do with ethnicity as well. So I taught a lot on the MBBS degree, and that's where I do normally do things. And the MBBS degree, again, 50% of the MBBS degrees South Asian, and then if we're talking about East Asian as well, that brings up to about 60-65%. And so strangely, at that time, they weren't accustomed to seeing a younger looking Asian man delivering lectures. So they would meet Asian clinicians on the wards, etc. in that role, but not in the lecture theatre. So I suppose that was a bit of a novelty factor. And so the community, when I first came to Imperial, the community that I belonged to was the student community. And it took a lot of time for that to change. Now here,
So just in terms of that kind of like being embraced by the student community, what benefits do you think that had both for yourself and for the students who were coming through at that time?
It was fascinating when I kind of reflect on it. I think when I started, I delivered lectures quite different to what other people did at that time. So it was all one of the things, I'm really good at PowerPoint, and so I know how to use that. And so it was very kind of whizzy types of lectures. People are like, wow, that's quite amazing. How does he do all of those animations, etc.? Now, it's kind of bog standard, but at the time it was like, wow. And so I was very popular amongst the students. I won, like, my first 5 years here, I'd won so many awards for kind of teaching. And what I think, I kind of look back at it, and I still wasn't accepted within the academic community. I said, oh, that's what I felt. Anyway. And I became a bit, I think there was around a period where I became a bit resentful for that. I was like, look at me, I must be brilliant because the students say that I'm brilliant. Kind of got caught up in my own hype a little bit. And I was, I still look back at, I'm still very proud of the number of awards that I've won. It's just kind of like, wow. Sometimes when I go into my office and I see it, it's just, anyway. So I got caught up in my own hype a little bit, and I was like, well, why am I not acknowledged in the same fashion as I am from the academic community? And the sense of belonging in the student community changes because obviously the students, the medic students, are only here for 6 years. And so all the students that loved me will have disappeared. And then you kind of have to keep thinking, but the academic community still stayed the same. And for me, in my eyes, to the academic community, I was irrelevant. And so that was quite a difficult period for me professionally. It was like, well, why do I not kind of belong to the people that I work? So that's why I felt, on the smaller scale, I did have colleagues who I was very close with. But on the whole, especially within the academic teaching community, I was a nobody, really. And in terms of socializing, the people who I used to socialize with was, again, people who were around my age. So it was more the kind of the FEO, so the people who worked on the programs team, the admin staff, etc., who were more kind of my age. So that was a community that I more readily belonged with, and this was to do with age, I suppose, and with the students it was to do with age and ethnicity.
It's a very interesting point that you made in terms of being acknowledged and recognized by the students, but at the same time not having that same recognition or being embraced in a similar manner by the academic community. Did you, I know that you probably have, but could you kind of like dissect what was the barrier between yourselves and the academic community, even though you've got the academic record. Why was it that you felt that you weren't necessarily being accepted in the same way?
No, it's a very good question. I mean, I think probably at the time, I was very comfortable blaming other people. It was kind of like, well, why don't you look at what I've done, kind of thing, etc. This is my record, etc. And you kind of get into that. You get into that kind of frame of mind. When I look back now, and I will say, now I'm at the stage where I am definitely very accepted within the academic community, probably more than I am ever expected to be, which is quite strange. But I look back and what are the reasons why? I suppose I'd got into a stage where I was in a comfort zone,
right?
And I was popular with the students. I knew what I needed to do to be popular with the students, and I knew what needed to happen. That was the objective. I didn't know what I needed to do to be respected by the staff,
right?
And to me, that was difficult. I didn't really know, and so what I really needed was guidance on that. And I was very lucky to get guidance on that. And it wasn't because of people not accepting me. So at the time I thought, well, it's everybody else's fault. The reality was that it was down to me being so comfortable in my own comfort zone that I wasn't happy enough to I wasn't willing enough to push the boundaries and think, you know what, I'm going to challenge myself. It's not other people's fault that I'm not acknowledged. It's my own fault for not trying. Well, I mean, I was, well, at least I thought I was trying.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I reflect back, I think, I did make perfunctory attempts, but I didn't really push myself out of my comfort zone to do that.
So it was, I would say it was, I think you're being a bit harsh on yourself, right? I'm going to say that in terms of, yes, you can get into a comfort zone, but there are other additional barriers, I would say, which sometimes mean you said that you had somebody who kind of like almost became like a mentor to you. Yeah. They had to open that door for you to see what was on the other side, because otherwise, if there's a term, snowy white peaks, right? Otherwise, or glass ceilings, whichever way you want to look at it, otherwise it's firmly shut for somebody who may not be seen as fitting in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because you could have been embraced by the academic community in the same way that the student community had embraced you, because clearly you must have been doing something really good for the students to be reporting all of these things back. So at the same point, all it took was somebody from the academic community to look and say, you know what, he's doing some good stuff. Let's get him on board. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it also took me to kind of listen to it as well.
Okay.
And quite often you can't see the woods for the trees, and you're stuck in your own kind of mind frame. Yeah. And people say things. These are the kind of things you need to do to improve, and you think, oh, you know what, yeah, that's a good idea. And but then enacting them, this, it might just be applying to me personally. I'm not saying I know about everybody's.
No. Yeah.
And then in terms of belonging as well, there was the teaching and learning community was developing at that stage. I mean, now there are within the school of there are over 100 teaching fellows.
Yeah,
there were a few teaching fellows. There were far more now. There was no kind of teaching fellow type community.
Yeah.
At all. There is no. I mean, if I'm being philosophical, I think what people need in life is they need a sense of belonging, they need a sense of direction or purpose. And there was no direction. And it's still not perfect for the teaching fellow community, but then there was absolutely no direction, no kind of purpose. Where was I going as a teaching fellow? Who did I belong to as a kind of teaching fellow? So there were questions on a kind of professional level as well. Those haven't been resolved, and I'll be honest with you, I've now got to that stage of belonging within the academic community where I've been given the opportunity to develop that sense of belonging for other teaching fellows. And so yeah.
So expand upon that a bit. What is it that you want to see that you didn't necessarily have? What is it that you want to develop in terms of of gaining that sense of belonging for others.
Okay, when you look at an Imperial College, and then this isn't any kind of negative about Imperial College. So Imperial College is, the most of the community. You have the academic community, which I'm going to count as, the pure research staff as well. You have the research staff, and then part of the research staff are involved in teaching. Then you have the clinical staff. You also have a lot of support staff as well. And these three streams have always been there. Many of them have been there, so you know where people go. I'm talking main. I'm going to refer mainly to the clinical stream, the academic and scientific stream. People have come in as PhD students, and they've gone to professor level, and so everyone knows what the pathway is. You will have role models to see who have done that. And the people who manage you are from within. Belong to that same community. Similar to clinicians, it's a 6-year MBBS degree. It's 2 years of junior training, 3 years of senior training, consultant, etc. You can go on different pathways. The pathway is very clear, and you belong to a specific community. For the teaching fellows, that's not really there. Recently, there's been a sense of kind of direction in terms of progression. In terms of community, that you kind of belong to a teaching and learning community, but it's quite diffuse. And so that's the kind of thing. In fact, that was one of the main things that kind of hit me. What I was told was, okay, you know you're good at teaching the students, you're good at teaching, you're sticking to your kind of compass, and what you now need to do is you need to develop other people to do the things that you're good at, instead of just continuing to do the things that you're good at, because it's not getting you anywhere further. And to me, that was very an important point. It's kind of like, it's not about me leaving a legacy or anything like that. It's a bit like, well, it's like,
but it is part of a legacy, really, because if you're really good at something, it's about that passage of information. You know how to connect with and get the best out of the students, whereas other people may not. We can all learn from each other. So if you're able to then impart some of that wisdom and that knowledge to somebody else, then hopefully the whole community is going to be in a better place. That's how I do it.
I mean, it's community, it's people. It's not me that's going to impart all the knowledge. That's why you need to develop this belonging to a certain professional community. So this belonging has now become one of the main aspects of my own role now. I see at Imperial College is to create a sense of belonging for a prominent community here within Imperial College. And it's not something that I ever originally set out to do, or it's not kind of like, I never saw myself in that kind of role, but the sense to give other people the sense of belonging in their professional areas that maybe I didn't have in my professional area. But that's not due to it being an inadequacy. There was just it
wasn't. So you're helping to develop that now.
Well, hopefully.
No, not hopefully. You're in the right place, and you've got the level of seniority, and so it's something that we could work on, definitely. I'm just conscious of time, and I've realized I've gone over my normal time where I invite questions from the audience. I've seen one from who? Would you like to ask or make your comment? Who? So it says, one of the comments that they made was, I feel like if one is born in a country that isn't your own origin, these issues will surface, unfortunately, especially when one is a minority, ethnic and religion. Every day is a challenge. Would you go on?
I think that's fascinating. And you're right. I don't think people often kind of identify that. I think again, you see, there are so many aspects of belonging. I mean, I touched a little bit about belonging to people in a religious community, belonging within an ethnic community, belonging in a school community. One of the things, I mean, with regards to that question, every day is a kind of challenge. What I think the thing that I'll reflect on is the thing that people see you most, not just your appearance, but literally. I mean, let's talk about your name. Most people communicate by email, and I find my name fascinating. So I'm going to bring this in the context of I've mentioned I've got two older sisters. Both of my older sisters have changed their names to more anglicized names that people can pronounce. I kept the name that I was given by my parents. I look at my name. My name is my name is a consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant. It's 5 letters, and it's very simple in that sense. So it's a strong name in terms of biblical. I mean, look at names like Peter, look at names like Simon. We have someone called Sarah here. That's a strong kind of biblical name. Jesus. These are all names that have that same structure. But just your name makes you different from people immediately. For example, my partner who has a conventional and Caucasian name, whenever we do anything where they require a name, we will always use her name rather than mine. Not because I'm bothered about anything. It just makes life easier. In fact, the only time I use my name is when we're ordering it from an Indian takeaway or something like that. Then I'm happy to use my name. But it's just those little things. So these little things. It's not. I mean, I'd say rather than being I don't see it so much as a challenge now. I just find it kind of intrigues me. But you feel immediately, just because of a name, I feel like I don't belong. I mean, I suppose to me the main example I would use is the name James. So the name James, and this is not to anyone, most of my good friends are called James. The name James has exactly the same sentence structure, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, but it should be pronounced Jamez. If you look at the structure. Now, if somebody pronounces the name James incorrectly in a meeting here, everyone will be like, well, no, the name's James, obviously, you idiot. But if someone pronounces my name incorrectly, I will apologize. And I have no problem. I will apologize. Oh no, because actually my name is spelled Sohag, but it's pronounced Shohag. I wouldn't expect people to know that. But that's because the name Shohag doesn't really belong in this community, whereas the name James does.
Yes. So it's that kind of like what is the norm and what is classed as the acceptable. Whereas if we were to go to Bangladesh, it's more likely that people would know exactly how to pronounce your name properly. Yeah,
there's actually a coach company called Sohag in Bangladesh. So I'm the equivalent. My name is the equivalent of the National Express, I suppose, or Megabus. If you want
to be. I've seen a question come in from Rosie. Rosie, would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to ask it?
Yeah, I don't mind. So I'm rubbish on Zoom, so
that's right.
Really?
Yes.
Hi Sohag. It's it sounds a bit like an interview question, but it's not meant like that. It's just I'm really interested in whether you think the fact that you've got clearly great teaching skills will help with the fact that you're now trying to kind of encourage this sense of belonging, whether there's kind of any read across from teaching into that kind of role. And I guess if so, I'm thinking that, there's probably something that other aspects of belonging and that kind of encouragement of community sense in Imperial could benefit from people who have teaching skills. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Absolutely. No, thank you. I think that's really important question again for me personally, and for general, because I mean the teaching community at Imperial is one of the communities that feels quite isolated, and Imperial is doing a bit, and the School of Medicine is trying, but you're right. How would my skills? I think what I would like my personal skills, whether they would necessarily translate. I don't think I am any more revolutionary than people are right now. There are people who are better than me at teaching. Absolutely, I have no issues with that. I think what I would want my teaching skills to be able to do is to more not so much people be inspired by my teaching skills per se. What you often find, as I kind of mentioned in terms of belonging, you need to see people who have done what you want to do. So I talked about someone becoming from a PhD student going on to become a professor. Maybe we could have, and in the medical community, there are people who start off from being a medical student going on to be a consultant. we don't really have. I mean, I started off here as a teaching fellow. Now I'm a principal teaching fellow. There aren't actually many people that have done that at Imperial College. So that's what I kind of feel I can help with. And so I'm not sure if that's fully kind of answered your question, but it's more in terms of this sense of belonging. It's more not necessarily the perfect role model, but just at least having a role model or seeing that people have done this and using that to help people belong to a community, or just developing a community in this particular case.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think that's really interesting, because it's not just about well, I mean, you know, it is about you being able to kind of support those people, but also, I mean, in reality, you're in a brand new space yourself now, because that hasn't happened before. So you're essentially leading a community that hasn't necessarily had a figurehead before, and the figurehead role is, you know, where does that belong? I guess it's just a never-ending cycle of kind of carving out a space for yourself as you develop professionally in that way. It's just really interesting, because the teaching fellow community is so relatively fresh to people's kind of cognition. I think it's just really interesting. Yeah,
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, to get a sense of belonging, somebody needs to create that community in the first place. And if I'm going to get very philosophical, the religions were created at a certain point, and as you know, a kind of figurehead, and people then really, you know, go to those. You know, religion is a big part of belonging to a certain group, probably one of the biggest things that people do out of their own choice. And you know, there were, oh god, it sounds like I'm being sacrilegious here, which I absolutely don't mean to be at all, right? You know, I don't mean to be anything kind of like that, but yeah, there I would never envisage myself as being a kind of like the figurehead, using the terminology that you use, but to get people to belong in a community, we need to start communities as well. Need to start.
Yeah, fantastic, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, Rosie, thank you so much for the question. You kind of like stole my final two questions, but that's fine. we're all friends, and I mean, no, it's fine, Rosie. Don't worry. What I was going to ask as my final question, because I'm just wary of what the time is normally I'd say, what advice would you give to your 16-year-old self? That's what my normal final question would be. And I would like to know that. But there's another question which is also burning in my mind. And that is, having taken on this new role, what would you like to see happen over the next 5 years going forward? What's the kind of things, or what's the kind of developments that you'd like to see take place within our community?
Okay, I think with regards to your first question, if I was going back to myself at 16, I'd probably say invest in Bitcoin or something like that. To be honest, it's like, no, on on a more honest note, with regards to developing this community, where I see it, I see it to be more like the teaching and learning community to be more like the academic community. So people know firstly where they're going, and where they're going in terms of where they can kind of end up, what their career progression is, and how that is respected within the university. People can see how people know how what they're doing is acknowledged by other people aside from just students. Because quite often within the teaching fellow community, it is just either the students think you're brilliant and work with very closely think you're brilliant. Nobody else really knows about you. So having more kind of exposure, both internally and kind of externally, and just knowing how to kind of do that. And you know, the sense of, I was talking about sense of purpose, sense of direction, going where you're going. So people who have done it, showing how you kind of get there. And then the sense of belonging. So there are a lot of teaching fellows now. We're a very very disparate community. And who do very different things, you know, postgrad, undergrad, clinical, just in specific degrees. Some people just work in MBBS, some people just work in BMB. And just kind of bringing people together, really. And we talked a bit about teaching skills. Other people have teaching skills that are brilliant, that I've never heard of, and people might be thinking about that. So bringing that kind of community together in general, and in 5 years' time, I see there being a proper teaching fellow development pathway and a proper teaching fellow community where people can get involved in, even if they might still be within their own little parochial area, but they still have other people that they know who to go to.
Yeah. Sohag, it's been brilliant. It's been really informative, engrossing, just hearing your experiences, your philosophical discussion about what it is to belong and how we've got to where we are. I just want to say a really big thank you for sharing that with us this afternoon. I know that I'm going to be in touch with you with some more words to get some more words of wisdom from you, because it was really, really good. So yeah.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry, I was saying I'm a bit of a loner, and then when I get the opportunity to talk, I just talk so much. I find it funny. I've just read Sarah. I'm going to call you Sarah. Sarah's comment in the chat about Sarah. So yeah, it is. Yeah. It's belonging to different communities. I find that fascinating.
No, it's absolutely brilliant. I'm just going to share with everyone what's going to be happening on next week's Belonging. For next week, we're going to be having Naira Chamberlain, and he is the he's the president of the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications. He was at the careers conference earlier in the year, and he had 15 minutes to 10 minutes actually to give his talk, but he's going to come and give us a little bit more about his journey in mathematics. And if you haven't had the opportunity to see any of the other interviews that we've done on the Belonging series, please go to our YouTube channel, which is at tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, and have a look at some of the videos that are there. Until next week, we want to just wish you a good weekend and say another big thank you for coming this afternoon. So take care, and I will see you next week.